Chapter 31 Satanic Panic. Satan continues to be a popular object of modern tale-spinning, stories that are far from harmless to individuals who have an entirely ethical interest in the occult. I include myself in that category. When I was 15 and attending high school, we had one period of religious education per week. For about half of the school year, this lesson consisted solely of our class reading through From Witchcraft to Christ, 1973, the autobiography of Doreen Irvine, allegedly an ex-witch and ex-Satanist. Today, revisiting the book 2 decades later, I'm amazed by how much of the story I remember. You might say it had something of an impact on me originally. It certainly reinforced my vague Christian beliefs and coloured my opinion of the occult. At 15, I was completely naive, and when I became a committed Christian at age 17, I wasn't much brighter. Now, however, as an adult who survived the brainwashing exercise of authoritarian religion and came out the other side with a razor-sharp intellect, a fresh reading of Irvine's autobiography makes quite a different impression on me. There are many elements of her depiction of Satanism that are impossible to reconcile with what is known about the religion. Irvine describes Satan as a literal being who also goes by the names Lucifer and Diablos. The erroneous conflation of Lucifer with Satan we have covered. Diablos is presumably Diabolus, Greek for devil. The author misspells the word throughout her account. She refers to the leader of her cult as the chief Satanist, having no knowledge of actual titles used in magical orders such as Magister, High Priest, or Ipsissimus. At one point she refers to her organization as the Order of Satanism, while at another it's the most ancient order of Satanism. Is the order called Satanism, or is it an order of Satanism? Irvine herself doesn't seem to know. The details of the ceremonies in which she participates are scant, as if she hasn't the necessary imagination for the task of invention required, and so she relies on brief summary. She claims to have been bestowed with the title the Queen of Black Witches, which is completely unheard of in occult lore. At one point in her story, Irvine had to walk through a bonfire, and as she did so, the devil walked with her, visibly as a black figure. On several occasions she talks about seeing Satan physically, hearing his voice audibly. Then later as a Christian she makes the same claims about Jesus. Of course, there's not a shred of evidence, and the reader is simply expected to take her word for everything. One night, Irvine is with her witch chums on the moor when several strangers come over the hill. She uses her satanic powers to make the witches invisible and avoid getting caught. Brimming with supernatural power, while devoid of esoteric knowledge, how does she do it? Irvine's errors and the complete lack of knowledge of the occult betray her. She describes Satanism in the most uninformed, stereotypical terms. To her, a Satanist is one who knowingly worships the actual Satan of the Bible. One who is given supernatural powers by him, one who believes that hell will be a place of pleasure, one who goes out of his way to do evil deeds, one who slaughters animals in ritual. She describes a comical religion fitting for a horror movie. Throughout the book, she refers to key characters using their forenames only, or job titles. Not even her parents' names are provided. She deliberately refrains from giving exact locations where important events took place. She talks about Satanist temples, but never gives the reader any clue where they are located. All this is unfortunate, because those details would have allowed her claims to be corroborated. Without them, the reader is left to make an entirely subjective judgment on whether the events she describes really took place. This is especially difficult given the supernatural claims. Equally hard to swallow is the account of Reverend Arthur Neal's exorcism of Irvine. Demons with names like doubt and lesbian are cast out of her. An intelligent reader will understand that doubt is a perfectly healthy psychological response, indicating a lack of conviction based on the absence of sufficient information. To label it a demon is utterly absurd. And to state that Christians can be cured of homosexual impulses by having a demon cast out of them is contrary to any rational examination of sexuality, not to mention contrary to the experiences of those Christians who remain lumbered with unwanted desires despite their faith. This is all disturbingly reminiscent of the ancient misdiagnosis of epileptic fits as demonic possession. Once Irvine is on the Christian path, the final quarter of the book is taken up by sanctimonious melodramatic stories of her early ministry as an evangelist. On one occasion, she sprained her ankle and was forced to cancel an appointment. Satan received the blame for the accident, convenient scapegoat that he is. How thrilling to believe that your little life is at the center of such cosmic drama. It's difficult to know how much of Irvine's story is deliberate deceit and how much is down to over-enthusiastic evangelists preying upon a psychologically unstable woman. Irvine's witchcraft experience is either entirely bogus or at least grossly exaggerated for dramatic effect. What bugs me is not so much Irvine's tale-telling, it's widespread credulity. Christians, already predisposed to accepting the supernatural, have an unfortunate tendency to simply believe without question the startling claims of other alleged Christians. From Witchcraft to Christ is a mega-seller. It has been read and believed by countless numbers of wide-eyed Christians who possess no knowledge of the occult with which to critique it effectively, and no propensity for healthy skepticism. Let the honest Christian reader take note. You should be every bit as concerned as I am to expose people like Doreen Irvine. Liars in your ranks do you no credit. Interestingly, there's not a single mention of the satanic ritual abuse, SRA, of children, something which became a staple of reports about Satanism in the 1980s and 1990s, the period known as the Satanic Panic. Clearly, in the 1970s, when Irvine wrote her story, SRA hysteria had not yet become part of the zeitgeist. The first book to be published on SRA was Michelle Remembers, 1980, co-written by Michelle Smith and her psychiatrist Lawrence Pazder. Over a period of 1 year, Pazder records hundreds of sessions where Smith allegedly recovers repressed memories of herself as a 5-year-old undergoing a prolonged period of ritual abuse at the hands of a satanic cult. She is tortured, sexually abused, locked in a cage, a witness to murders, and painted in the blood of sacrifice victims. At one point, a Satanist sews horns and a tail into Smith's flesh. The scars left by this surgery would have proved invaluable in authenticating the account, but there is no such evidence on Smith's adult body. The ceremonies were gory and bizarre, and bore no relation to the rituals of the Church of Satan. Nevertheless, Pazder wastes no time in naming this specific organization as the perpetrator of Smith's abuse. He also states, in total ignorance of known facts, the Church of Satan is a worldwide organization. It's actually older than the Christian Church. Pazder was forced to withdraw his assertion of the Church of Satan's involvement after the book's publication, when Anton LaVey threatened to sue for libel. As the story progresses, it becomes clear that Smith's idea of Satanism suffers from the same faulty assumptions as Doreen Irvine's account. She depicts Satanists as worshippers of the literal devil of the Bible. The rituals are filled with pointless, nonsensical, sinister elements and horror movie trappings, including the appearance of a monstrous spider crawling across an altar cloth, and a vampire bat with claw-tipped wings perched on the altar's edge. In the final quarter of the book, Satan makes regular appearances in the flesh, and Smith's depiction of him is an all-out horror movie cliché, right down to the horns on his head and the claws on his hands. Curiously, he has a pig's snout and sports a tail that occasionally shapeshifts into a snake. Fire sprouts from his back. Amusingly, Satan insists on continually speaking in rhyming verse throughout the account. Quote, "The knife is ready, it is time to begin. It has been poisoned and sharpened very thin." End quote. I confess that while I was reading the early pages of the book, I seriously considered that this child might have been the victim of some deeply unethical occult group. But by the time I finished, the entire tale had made a nosedive into total religious farce. In addition to enduring the devil's bad poetry, Smith witnessed heads spinning, just like Linda Blair in the movie The Exorcist, 1973. Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and the Archangel Michael appear to Smith at various points during her dark days in the ritual chamber. Absurdly, Mary sprinkles her sentences with French, which would not have been her native language, nor is it Smith's. The two authors' combined depiction of Satanism seems to be a fusion of their own Catholic prejudices and Pasdur's past encounters with unusual religion from the time he spent working and living in Africa in the 1960s. He goes as far as drawing this comparison himself in the book. It's hard to see how Pasdur maintained any credibility with his peers after publishing this unconscionable mix of psychiatry and superstition as fact. It also turns out that some of Smith's claims are provably false beyond reasonable doubt. Early in the story, she is allegedly involved in a car crash that is staged to look like an accident, as a means of the Satanists getting rid of a dead body. Conveniently, it happened so long ago that police and hospital records of the event had been destroyed by the time of Smith's therapy. However, Pasdur overlooked the fact that it's possible to check newspaper records in library archives. No such incident was reported around the time indicated by Smith's testimony. The book features a photograph of a mausoleum at Ross Bay Cemetery, at which a ritual allegedly took place. However, when this building is snapped from a different angle, as another photographer has since demonstrated, the mausoleum is revealed to be within eyeshot of suburban houses. Maybe the Satanists used one of Doreen Irvine's invisibility spells. Towards the end of the book, there is an 81-day non-stop ceremony. Yearbooks from Smith's elementary school have revealed no indication of her being missing for a lengthy period of time. There are many more problems with Smith's account that I could raise, but these examples suffice to destroy her credibility. All that remains is to determine whether she is delusional or an outright liar. The coherency and detail in her account compel me to side with the latter. Even without the evidence against Smith and Pasdur, the simple fact that nothing can be corroborated ought to ring warning bells in the minds of readers. But many people have never made the mental effort to learn what criteria they ought to use in separating truth from falsehood. People tend to believe something if it merely feels true, or if they simply want to believe. The ability to believe claims in the absence of evidence is how witch hunts are born, and in this instance, that's exactly what happened. Michelle Remembers opened the floodgates for countless reports of satanic ritual abuse. Pasdur was considered to be an expert. He became involved in the Cult Crime Impact Network and lectured to police agencies about SRA during the late 1980s. By September 1990, he had been consulted in more than 1,000 ritual abuse cases. Closure of the satanic panic finally came with the publication of the Lanning Report, 1992, by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 300 cases of multi-victim, multi-offender SRA were examined, and no physical evidence of abuse could be found. The existence of an underground occult organization engaging in SRA could not be substantiated. This document can be read in full on the internet. Even so, conspiracy theorists still like to keep the phenomenon alive. I read this in an online forum. The Lanning Report is a load of pig shit, if you ask me, written by the same people it claims do not exist. Of course, the conspiracy theorist doesn't require actual evidence of the FBI's involvement in a cover-up. The mere suspicion of it is enough to warrant firm belief. During the years of the panic, the lives of many law-abiding Satanists and other occultists were subjected to the judgments of a dangerously ignorant population, including its law enforcement, that was feeding on a diet of sensationalist propaganda. By contrast, the uncovering of real, verified, widespread child sexual abuse within the Catholic Church has to be one of the most spectacular reversals of expectation in history, as we discover that real evil lies within those who masquerade as the good, rather than those who merely enjoy the glamour of sinister symbolism. It is ironic that Christians pin such practices as ritualized child sexual abuse, animal sacrifice, and child sacrifice on occultists, when it was their own God who once required these practices of his people. Yahweh demanded that male babies should suffer pointless genital mutilation in a bizarre religious rite called circumcision. Genesis chapter 17, verse 12. He required the continuous slaughter of animals upon an altar to himself because he couldn't get enough of the smell of burning flesh. The phrase, "an aroma pleasing to the Lord," is repeated throughout the book of Leviticus. He even ordered Abraham to ritualistically sacrifice his son Isaac. Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 to 12. He may have relented at the last moment, but the fact that Abraham was willing to subdue his natural compassion to perform this act was praiseworthy in the eyes of this deity. Christians call this level of devotion fanaticism when talking about other religions. Christianity itself is built around the ritual sacrifice of its central character, a sacrifice that is recalled on a weekly basis in a faux flesh-eating, blood-drinking ritual called the Eucharist. Christians need look no further than their own religious heritage for the crimes of which they accuse occultists. I used to think that God sacrificing himself for the sins of mankind was a profound idea. I would not have thought so had I understood the origin of the practice of sacrifice. Sacrifice exists in many ancient religious traditions, as far off from Judeo-Christianity as the Aztecs and Mayans of the Americas. Why did man come up with the idea of sacrificing to the gods in the first place, a practice that seems bizarre to us? He observed that the corpse of an animal decomposes and fertilizes the ground on which it lies, stimulating the growth of plants. Of course, he couldn't perceive it in this modern scientific fashion. His understanding was simply, from death comes life. The mysterious hidden forces of causation in nature that he calls gods appear to reward death. And so, the idea of deliberately killing animals, and sometimes humans, to please the gods was born. The idea of sacrifice in Judeo-Christianity is much more elaborate than this basic premise, involving the substitution of another's death in place of one's own, to make amends for one's offences against God. However, in considering the sacrifice of Jesus, one cannot escape the outdated quasi-logic from which the whole notion of sacrifice itself sprung. The present chapter has been peripheral to the main theme of my book, but I felt it was important to raise this information because I am about to talk about black magic, and I will not be doing so in a typical spirit of fear and condemnation. Taking such a stance involves risk, because some persons will undoubtedly view me as evil by default. It is dangerous for an individualist to speak out in the midst of a poorly educated population whose minds are filled with unexamined superstitious notions about reality. Take a look at the state of Christianity in Africa if you need confirmation of that. Over there, Confused, helpless children are subjected to physical and psychological abuse after being identified as witches by Pentecostal and charismatic pastors who mix Christianity with African witchcraft beliefs. We are not so poorly educated here, but still, it is too easy for someone in my position to be tarred as the bad guy. And it's not safe to be the bad guy. On the internet, I have been called everything from demon-possessed to a shape-shifting reptilian alien in human guise. Oh yes, the guy was serious. The satanic panic must never happen again. That will only be possible through the widespread triumph of reason over superstition. And that, reader, is up to you.